Seawold, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about growing ourselves while raising our children. I'm a psychologist, educator, and parent coach. And on this podcast, I explore how you can connect to your authentic self, practice radical self-care, and raise emotionally healthy children. Let's break the cycle of generational trauma for a more peaceful, kind, and compassionate world. Today, how changing your story can change your life. I am speaking with a returning guest, Nina Mongendre. Nina is a trained family constellations instructor. She does inherited family trauma coaching. She's also a certified neuro-emotional coach. She's a Kundalini yoga and meditation teacher. She is the creator of the Inner Child and Beyond Oracle deck and guidebook. She is the founder of Sage Moon, an online sustainable lifestyle store. And currently she is writing a book. She also happens to be a dear friend. Nina has appeared in episode Who We Are and How We Heal, a fantastic conversation. And today's episode is a wide-ranging one. We tried to catch up as well as record a podcast. She moved with her family last year with her two young daughters to France from the United States. And it's been quite an experience for her personally and for her family. We talked about many different things, from inner child work, reparenting, accessing our inner wisdom, receiving love and care from others, changing the narrative of our life, giving ourselves more love and care, living open-heartedly, as well as defining and redefining parenting values, finding the balance of living in the moment and embracing life circumstances and handling disappointments, dealing with change, and so much more. She's wonderful. Her work is fascinating, and I immensely enjoyed this conversation. And I hope you will find it useful, inspiring, and I hope it will spark some beautiful insights to reflect on your own upbringing, your own healing life, and start changing the narrative. Please enjoy. How are you?
Good. It's so good to see you.
Oh my gosh, it's so good to see you. It's been so long. Can't believe it.
I know.
I feel like we became friends and you left.
I know. I wish I was sitting in your apartment. It was so cozy last time.
I know. It was so wonderful. Yeah.
But we're going to be in the US for at least 6 weeks this summer. So we'll definitely see each other if you're around.
When would you be here?
So probably like July 8th until August 20th. So almost 2 months.
Yeah, I'll be here. Yes.
Awesome. We'll get together. That's great.
That's great. Yeah, very good. And then you're going to go back again?
Yeah, we decided to stay for another year because it took us so long just to even adjust, and for the girls to set up this whole homeschooling. And so we want to give it another year to just settle into rhythm. My husband really likes it here. Like, I miss my friends and the community a lot. My older daughter too, like, she definitely misses her friends, and she's still having a little hard time at school with the dynamics in her class. So I want to just, I don't know.
And you know what? People miss you too. Once I went to the Salt House. The Salt House.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. The way people spoke about you and the way they miss you, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so sad. It really impacted them. And obviously they didn't know that I know you, and they were sharing it. I listened to that. I'm like, wow, it's incredible how one person can be such an important part of this community. And yeah, so I think you're missed big time in that community, at least. Yeah.
Yeah, I miss everyone too. It's weird because I haven't taught, I haven't been doing any of that stuff like since last July. It's interesting. Like I'm questioning a lot of things. I'm like, is that what I want to keep doing? Or do I don't know. It's like a very interesting life phase right now.
Oh, you don't want to continue?
I mean, not here, not in France. Like I don't have the desire to like rebuild all that here. If I went back, yes, then I would continue teaching and I would go back to doing that. But here, I don't know. Like if we end up staying longer, I don't know what I would do. So it's kind of a whole new world. Like I love the coaching. I think I would continue doing that, but I don't know what else in terms of teaching. So
Oh, wow. And if you're not going to stay there long term, building it all and leaving that community again.
Yeah, exactly. Like I definitely don't want to do that unless I know that, okay, we're committing to France and, for the next 5, 10, whatever, like we're going to raise the kids here, which we're not ready to do at this point.
Yeah, it's a lot of a lot of questions. It feels like, how do you sit with that uncertainty? How do you live with that?
It's, I think, just living in the moment, right? Like being just, it's the only way. And the more I hear about people dying, suddenly, and I was just at a healing session with this amazing woman who does kinesiology, and her brother just died last week. They were supposed to go on vacation together, and he died playing tennis. Like he had a bad fall, and I guess, maybe his head or something, and he just died. And probably in his, young man, like she's maybe in her 50s. And so that, which you and I have really experienced, that sudden upheaval of everything, once you experience that, it's like almost like, not that you're waiting for it to happen again, obviously, but I feel the world like takes on this other quality where it's hard to say, okay, for 10 years, I'm going to be doing this, it's like, you can't really plan that way. Like, I feel it just really shifts your whole world around where you almost just have to be present to each moment and cherish, what you have in a different way.
Yeah. But I think there's still room for planning, right? I feel like
there is,
right?
Yeah.
Like what's that balance? How much to plan? I think there is planning, but not clinging to your plans, being open and flexible to change. That's a skill, but without planning, that's also a source of anxiety. I feel like if you don't plan an upcoming event, a birthday, then how could you do it, right? But you also don't want to cling to your expectations and plans and so rigidly say, but I planned, I wanted it to be this way. I think that's where the finding that flow, I feel like, is so hard. Being flexible, not rigid, but not being completely in the moment, but also being in the moment.
Yes. And it makes me think so much of parenting, because that's been my biggest challenge with parenting is, my husband and I really like being in the flow and not having too many plans. But with children, exactly like you said, it brings them a sense of safety. So it's been the biggest learning for me is to have a plan, stick to it, and then, yes, of course, be flexible, but understanding how much safety and freedom you can have within the structure. For me, I think it's a lifelong lesson. I'm definitely not done learning that, but my children have been my greatest teachers around that topic for sure, that you do need a certain amount of that. And it makes your nervous system feel much safer when you know what's happening next.
Yeah. At least loosely you need plan. At least I feel like I call this the freedom frame when I first started developing my parenting philosophy when I was, younger and wanted to work with parents. The idea came actually based on my work experience in a juvenile correctional facility. I used to work with French people, the Medicine Without Borders organization. So I worked in the French branch of that organization. And when I was working in the correctional facility, we used to talk about giving children freedom, but obviously those children were incarcerated. So I thought about that a lot, those two concepts, freedom, autonomy, and limits and structure. So when I was developing my own parenting philosophy for working with parents, this notion of freedom frame came to my mind. I'm like, okay, so you have a frame and you give freedom within that frame to your children. But what do you base that frame on, right? Like, how do you, in your mind, obviously this is in your mind, this is not a concrete frame. And so I thought about this. It's based on your parenting goals, based on your values, based on your morals and beliefs. Those are the four sides of the rectangle, if you will. And it's not small, that rectangle, and it's not too big, right? And you give freedom to your child within that frame. I know it's hard to explain to other people, but for me, it makes total sense, And that's what it is. You want to have routines and structure for safety, but you also want to be spontaneous and free and give children freedom so that you can have that nice balance. It's not too rigid and stifling, and it's not too free. That is like anarchy. If you don't have the borders, if you don't have the frame, if you don't know what you're doing as a parent, what your long-term goals are, or your values or your beliefs, then you're just wobbly. You're going here and there, following that or that, swimming. I feel like you need that frame to guide you. And it's very unique to each individual, right?
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree. And it's a journey of growing up as a parent and as an adult, right? Depending on how old you are and how clear you are on your values when you have children, because often couples may not have discussed this. I think there is not much preparation for people when they become parents. I think that's a big lack in our society. Like somebody should, especially for people who don't have parents. When I had my first child, my parents had already passed. And so I did not have that guidance. And you're absolutely right. And I feel I'm still defining and refining my values, and those values can change, right? In 10 years, my values might change. And so I really love that image that you have of that boundary, that frame, and that it is different for each family, but it's essential to have it, or to start. If you don't have it, begin to think of that and to define those lines, because it guiding principle, like for a family, is really helpful for children. What are we striving towards? Why are we here? That's those existential questions that children start to have pretty early.
Yeah, I was talking to a client yesterday. He is Chinese and his wife is Taiwanese, and their son is an American, right? And he says that they're not having family dinners. Everyone feels disconnected. And he was in pain talking about this, how the family is only 3 people, but they're so disconnected, disjointed. They don't even eat together. And he said that's such a big value for him growing up. His siblings, his mothers, they cooked together. They lingered at the table together. This is a big value. And now his kid is a teenager, is almost out of the house. Only now he realizes that he missed this opportunity of instilling that, and he feels the pain of it, that it's elapsed this time. And so, yes, it's important to know what we want to, what we value and what are our goals. How do we want to get there? We may not know exactly the correct road map, right? There is no map, but at least knowing what you're aiming for, what you want to instill. I think that's a conversation we need to have with ourselves, with our partners, so that we're not hurting in the end, like that person is hurting.
Absolutely. And that conversation I've actually had with my husband this year. We really worked on defining our values, because we had certain values. We met when we were in our early 20s. Now we're in our 40s and they've changed. And so it was a very helpful exercise to hear each other's values, to see where we are together on values, and then to honor that some of the values may be different, but then which are the ones that we want to really focus on as a family and convey to our children. And we realized like one of the main ones is kindness, which, I have it in me, but I wouldn't have thought of it, if you had asked me. And then freedom for me, that's a big one, freedom of movement and being able to travel and explore different cultures. And I wouldn't have defined it either. But when I was trying to have to make a list and select things, and then that came through for both of us, for both him and I. And so then how do you actually act? So if you have that value, let's say of freedom and of kindness, 2 of the main values, how do you live that, right? Because it's not enough just to say, okay, kids, like in our family, we're kind, and then you're, not kind to each other. It's really, really takes deep work to actually implement, and each day do your best and mess up. And, we're striving towards these things. So I think it is very important.
Yeah. And if you have your values, even if you mess up, you can always revert back and know where to start again, because it's a guiding principle, right? But if you don't know, then that's more confusing, disorienting. It's like you're going to a place, you don't have a GPS, you have a map, but that map is like all upside down, wrong. You're going to circle and circle and circle and never reach your destination. So it's useful to have some kind of direction. And the goals, parenting goals are important too. Right? At the end of the day, what do you want your children to be, to learn skills? What are we aiming here? It's not enough just to say, I want my kid to be healthy and happy, right? It's like everybody wants that, but
it's not enough. And also, that's what my parents always would say, do what you love. I just want you to be happy. And yet they maybe, in their lives. And again, I'm not expecting any perfection. I'm not judging them at all. But for myself, if I say that, then I want to, as much as possible, strive to do that for myself, right? As a woman, as a wife, as a parent, because otherwise it's putting a burden on the children to be, well, I want you to be happy, because happiness, that's a big thing. It's not easy, right? In this world that we live in. So what is happiness? I feel that needs to be even defined in smaller chunks. Is it meaningful work? That's a huge question I coach people. I know you coach people. That's a big question for many adults. Am I doing meaningful work? How do I do meaningful work? That's not an easy one either to tell the child, Yeah, relationships are complicated. I mean, all of these things, right, that we put under happiness are loaded.
Yeah. And you're right. Just be happy. I want you just to be happy. It's like, what does that mean? But then when that particular child wants to pursue an art or a hobby or give up a sport or something like that, which is aligned with their values and ultimately will make them feel happy, parents get in the way. They're like, no, you got to continue this because we have our own version of the success story. Even though we say, do whatever you want, be happy, we're not fully embracing that idea without clinging to expectations and things like that. We're so conditioned. I think it takes courage, right, to completely let go of those things. That's why I feel like when you left everything here and you picked up and moved to France, I feel like that is aligned with that. Like you shook everything up and you started a life in a completely new country. Like what showed up for you?
Oh, so much. And I was rereading old journals from 15 years ago. And I already was thinking, what if I moved to France? Like, how would that be like? Every time I go there, I feel different. It's been a 15-year plus desire, but I just didn't have the courage or didn't feel that like the right time. And it was a huge like jump off a cliff, because we had so much in Hopewell and friends, community, meaningful work. Speaking of happiness, right? Just all these things. But we just had this tugging at our hearts. Like both my husband and I, he's originally from Russia and he with all the insanity going on there, he's so upset, by that war and just disgusted. And he was longing for like a reconnection with some roots. But so for him now, this experience of living here, even though there's been plenty of challenges, he's felt like just a deep peace, like on a soul level of being on the land here. And for me, it's been interesting. It's brought up a lot of inner child, beautiful things and then some challenges because I grew up here and I lived in France till I was 18. But then I spent my whole adult life in America. And so really I'm more comfortable speaking English and I'm more comfortable with teaching and working in English. And so it is like in a way being a little bit in a foreign country, even though it's not foreign. And then returning here when my parents aren't here, when I left France, they were both living in our childhood home in France. And so now bringing my two daughters to reconnect with the land, but without my parents being here. I mean, there's so many layers of psychological complexity. Overall, it feels like it was the right thing to do. I'm happy that I trusted that calling of the heart, even though there was absolutely nothing rational about it. And even though it's been very challenging for the kids and for us, maybe less so because we're adults and we can do our work remotely, but it's taught us so much as a family. I feel it has brought us together. It has forced us to define these values, to look at what is happiness. And then as a group of 4 people in this family, if 2 or 3 are happy, quote unquote, and then 1 wants to go back, how do you work this? And how do you go through the challenges, persevere, and then actually find some joy on the other side, right? So that anxiety of change, of difference, of language at school, seeing my older daughter, struggle through it, but then also seeing her in those moments where it's just her whole face lights up because she's had a better day at school and she's understood something or learned something in a language that isn't her first language, and or she's made a bond with a friend. Just seeing that as a parent is really wonderful and fulfilling, but it is through adversity. Right? It's like going through that anxiety, through that resistance of something very uncomfortable. She went from being extremely comfortable, easy, in her school to something the complete opposite. And as a parent, trusting that for her life, like long term, this is going to be a positive, even though it might not seem like it is now. Like that has been such a journey for me, because as a parent, I just want to run back to the comfortable home in Hopewell, and everything is known, everything is safe. I know she's going to be quote unquote happier. But then is that what is needed? Is that what's right? When we think of our values and our level of stress, might be less here, there's less financial pressure. So when we look at all the factors together, how do you decide, for the family?
Yeah. And how much stress is too much, right? Is it the manageable stress for your child to be in that new environment, or is it traumatizing, right? It's like you don't want to stay in your comfort zone and do the known things, then there is no growth. That's like stagnation, even for our children. But you also don't want to put them in an environment where there are so many unknowns and so many stressful things that they cannot adopt, right? Just the right amount of challenge. Not the hill doesn't have to be so steep that you're overwhelmed, or it shouldn't be like so flat that you walk on it easily. It has to be just the right amount of challenge for growth. And do you feel like this is the right amount of challenge for you and for the kids, or is it beyond your capacity?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Right now, we're feeling it goes in waves. That's what's so complicated about it. There are weeks where it feels like it's just the right amount. And then there are weeks where, for my older daughter who's in school, the younger one is homeschooling right now because she had a lot of anxiety at the beginning of the year. So she's home with us and she's fine. She's thriving in her homeschool. But for my older one, there are some weeks I'm really doubting. I'm like, is this too much? I can see in her emotional overwhelm, at home after school, and her complaints, and just observing her, where I do have some fear there if it's too much. And so that's what we're sitting with right now, as there's a few months of school left. What do we do for next year?
Yeah, and that's a critical question, right? Maybe next year it will be much easier because you persevered through this difficult year, which was filled with challenges and obstacles. So if you pull too early, then you won't have the opportunity for more growth and potentially so many wonderful things for your daughter. Do you know what I mean? It's like always so hard to know.
Yes.
Hi, I hope you're enjoying the show so far. If you're not already a regular listener, be sure to hit that follow button so that you never miss a new episode. So I'm really curious about this inner child stuff that, awoke in you while you're there. And you wrote me in the text message, you said there were two. Obviously, you're working on your book too. I don't know if you want to say a few words about that, since we haven't talked much, like we are updating each other and doing a podcast. So catch me up with the book project. Where are you and what new ideas are you exploring now?
I'm in the final stages. Like I have my outline, I have most of it ready. And what I've really been tuning into is the hero's journey, and is that myth still helpful for our times? That idea of the hero's journey, departing, being called, facing challenges, going into the belly of the whale and really, really suffering and having allies and guides, and then coming back out and returning home. And that's just been so present in my psyche, I feel, as I have returned home in a way to this country and have faced challenges. And I was thinking of inner child work as the same journey. It's an inner journey. It's an inner pilgrimage. Of course, we're visiting within ourselves, within our psyche, but also we're traveling within the collective memory, and we're visiting these archetypes, or energies, forms that exist outside of us, right? They're collective, they're in the collective realm, and they exist forever, and they're always evolving. And so we can relate to them. They can feed us, we feed them with our life, and our images and arts and music and everything, right, is informed around that, the myth and the archetype. But the inner mother and inner father, I've been thinking about that a lot. As I don't have that external support, how can I nourish myself? How can I access wisdom that is beyond just me, Nina, right now in this day and age and with what I know? How can I tap into a bigger force? Like, we could call it the divine mother or the divine father, but I really like that inner, because we don't have that divine word on it, which I think can be loaded. And you and I had a very interesting conversation about why we don't like the word reparenting, right? Because there's a judgment. There's like, we're redoing something that cannot be redone. Like, you were parented. If you're listening to this, you're an adult, and that's it. Your parents did what they did. But what is this journey of being informed by an inner mother and an inner father? Because in a way, we always have, it's like, could be like a higher self, right? We always have this guidance that's available to us. And I'm also working with guidance from our future self. So imagining ourselves in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and asking that version of us to show us, like, how did you overcome this challenge with school, for example, right? I could ask myself in 10 years, what do you recommend I do? What can you show me? How can I move through this with more grace? What does my daughter need? And so it's these inner resources, which I feel are so important in an age where we're disconnected from grandparents, from mentors, from the wise people in the village. Like, we don't really have that. But we do have this inner wisdom inside of us. So that's what the book is going to be looking at, is kind of this hero's journey of you supporting your inner child, revisiting the past, but also tapping into resources that are greater than you and that live both in you, but on the outside as well. And the last thing I wanted to mention is that when we think of inner mother, it can be in our friendships. It can be in a conversation, like you have tea with a friend and you're receiving love in that moment, or somebody gives you a flower, you walk down the street and a stranger smiles at you. That can be receiving from the mother or the father energy, the archetype. It doesn't have to be like your biological parent or a figure that acts as your parent. It can really be like receiving love in everyday small little moments. I mean, I've found in my life, that's how I've found the nourishment that is lacking because my parents aren't physically present. That's been a way that I've been able to receive more into my heart.
Wow, you said so much. It's so packed. Yeah, that wisdom lives inside of us, right? The wisdom from the past and the wisdom of the future self, the higher self. I find personally tapping into the future self a lot easily than to the past for some reason. It could be the case for other people differently, right? And I think it's such a powerful question, even when I'm working with people who are like in the bind, are struggling with something and they don't see the future, or, they don't know if there's any light at the end of the tunnel. You ask them, what would your future self tell you right now? Like, imagine yourself 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and they immediately get a perspective shift, like almost immediately, as if we do know the wisdom is there, but how can we access it? How can we tap into that wisdom? And you're right, receiving that love, being open to receiving. And it means in some ways changing our idea of love and care and kindness, because it's there. It's in everyday moments, right? If you're stuck in your drama of, I didn't get love, I didn't, receive this from my parents. What are you receiving today from the world, from people? It's not like you're deprived. I rarely meet people who are completely deprived of love, attention, and care, right? I mean, can we tap into that and receive from other sources, whether that's nature, whether that's other people, whether that's art that can nourish you and you can receive things? Maybe it might be hard for you to give it to yourself if you weren't given early on, but could you receive it from other sources just to practice receiving? That act of letting something kind touch you, letting something warm that you deserve it. I think practicing that receiving in whatever way you can is still, that's healing. That healing of that trauma that you didn't receive from your parents. I feel like we are so sometimes concrete in what we didn't receive from our parents. Like we get stuck in thinking too concrete. Does this resonate with you?
Oh, completely. That's a big part of what I'm writing about too, is this victim triangle, how we're stuck in it's called the drama triangle: victim, bully, / perpetrator, and rescuer. And so often the inner child, of course, will be the victim, right? We learn that in childhood. And then one of the parents will be the bully, like the abuser, the alcoholic, the verbally, physically abusive one. And then the other parent might be the rescuer or somebody from outside the family, maybe a teacher, right? And as long as we're in this triangle, we're stuck, because as we grow up, we might even circle between the modes. So sometimes we'll try to rescue people, like our partners in relationship. We'll try to be the hero and save them, or we'll become a bully because out of the childhood pain, we'll be inflicting that on other people. And then we need a victim. So all these positions depend on each other. And the only way to get out of this is to really have the awareness and to step out of that old story. It's not easy though, right? Because victimhood, what you were talking about, it's my parents' fault. It's how I was raised. I never received this, and you see adults who haven't grown up because they're still stuck in this resentment. And I loved how you described it. I'm imagining people, and we've all experienced this. We're walking down the street with blinders. There's beauty all around us, an opportunity for connection all around us, but we are just so in our little heads, like, we're just like completely like the horse with the blinders, and we are missing out on all these opportunities for joy, for connection, for warmth. And so that is really, I don't feel we can say we've grown up as long as we are blaming our parents or holding resentment or waiting for our parents to give us what they couldn't give us. I'm waiting for if people are like, well, my mother always criticizes me, or my mother didn't do this. They're still waiting. It's not going to come from her. If it does, beautiful. It'll be a surprise, but we cannot be victims and wait our whole lives for this poor one human being to give you, right? Like you're giving them too much power. And yes, so and in essence, exactly what you've been talking about has been the subject of what I'm looking at. That's exactly that. How do we rewrite our story? How do we acknowledge what was, accept what was, and move on and nourish ourselves in other ways?
Definitely. I mean, there are so many opportunities for nourishing ourselves in small ways, right? Everyday small ways. But I think it's just changing the narrative to see that there is potential and opportunity for doing that. But maybe the person who is deeply wounded, they don't believe in that it's out there. They don't have a lot of confirmation from the world. Because sometimes it's hard to give it to yourself, right? You internalize the perpetrator's patterns. You're critical to yourself. You're berating yourself. It's like, how can you turn around and be nice and kind and compassionate to yourself? That's a bigger ask, I feel like, than trying to orient yourself and receiving from God, from nature, from art, from books, from other people, from fellow humans, warmth and kindness and care that is available. Just being open to that, and maybe even saying, I'm going to live my life, like I'm going to open my heart just a tiny bit, even though I was hurt in a relationship. But that's no longer the case, that my people who hurt me are no longer hurting me. It's like one of my clients who was in an abusive marriage, years even after the divorce finalized, and they still have issues, co-parenting issues and all of that. They don't talk to one another. They don't see one another, the husband and wife. She emailed me one day and said, he's so abusive. He's so abusive. I said, what do you mean he's abusive? Hold on a second. I thought like you guys don't even talk. You don't even see one another. She's like, well, indirectly. And I'm like, It's like, she's afraid to send him an email because in her mind, she still has PTSD from this violence that she endured. She's still reliving that, even though it's been years that there is no interaction between them. But she says indirectly, he's abusing me still, right? How do we let go of those stories and open our eyes and see the new reality,
Yeah. So what I found is very helpful is to revisit those moments, and when we say inner child work, it doesn't have to be only your 5-year-old self. It could be, for example, for your client, really traveling back to that moment and bringing her current self and offering what was needed in that scene, so almost like a sacred theater. You journey back. Let's say she was 30 at the time. Now she's 40. You go in and you observe. You see the feelings, the unprocessed grief, the anger, the pain, all of it. And she, as her current self, steps in and maybe speaks up or protects. You kind of like you were a director, you step back in and you redirect the scene, or you intervene and do what you wish somebody could have done for you, until you feel, okay, I'm no longer the victim there. There's a sense of vitality, of power, because when we bring support, and of course she might hug her 30-year-old self, listen to her cry, wrap a warm blanket around her. Like literally, you can take this as far as you need. And then when you feel it's complete, you take her out of that scene, so invite the 30-year-old, and you would do the same thing with the 5-year-old self in a difficult memory or moment. Would you like to come with me? Would you like to, let's leave this to be in the past with a little more support, that's been brought to that moment. So it's not as like alive and traumatic. When, Peter Levine, right, and all that trauma work, when they completing the fight or flight process, right, by allowing the client to like move the legs or run or imagine yourself running, we're kind of doing the same thing. We're revisiting the moment where we froze or we weren't capable of stating our needs, of getting anything we would have wanted to get in that moment. We're completing that. We're offering support. And then we're inviting a little piece of this is where the shamanic kind of soul retrieval steps into it, where you're just energetically reclaiming that part of you. So it doesn't stay out there, unsupported, victimized, in pain, and you bring it back. And we're not denying, of course, the trauma of what was, right? It was horrible. It was very hard, but what we're doing is we're unfreezing the moment so that this client you were talking about, she can now feel, okay, I'm a little more empowered and I can choose differently. I can have a different relationship moving forward. So that for me in my own work, I've done this with parts of myself at many ages. Like I once worked with my 26-year-old version, like sitting by my mother's deathbed, and talking to her and being like, there's nothing you can do to save her, because I used to think I could save her. I was like, I wish there was something I could have done differently. Maybe I didn't talk to the doctor or find out things in the right way, right? And now that I know that that's not true. And so I revisited her, I went, I held her, I sat with her. And so I find this is really a helpful resource. And this is what I'm going to share in the book, some journeys of how we can revisit the past in order to bring a little more peace and acceptance to what was.
Yeah. And not have those fragmented pieces of ourself and psyche be there, but bring it together. This is parts work, right? This is Dick Schwartz's work, IFS. I find it fascinating how it sounds simple, right? You're doing the work. I mean, obviously not everybody can do it on their own. You could do it with a therapist or with someone who is trained in that, but you're doing the work. It's all in your mind. It's all in your imagination. You're offering the resource to yourself, caring. And I find that extremely powerful, mind-blowing. It's so empowering to know that, well, that's available. That healing is possible for people. It's like so beautiful that we can do that. So this word you mentioned, reparenting. And so that is not reparenting then, right? I do have I don't like that word, reparenting. I really don't. I wish we can choose a different word or express it differently. I like the concept of it. Obviously, the idea of it is good. But yeah, reparenting also for me is like has that judgment, but denies that our parents also were wounded people, right? They didn't do this on purpose. And now we're going and redoing their work. It's like doesn't honor them in some way. It's like they did what they could with what they had with their trauma. But I know also it's hard for a lot of people to generate compassion towards their perpetrators, towards their bully parents who abused them. Like you and I think are one of those rare people who have understanding and compassion for their parents' trauma without having, I'm not sure, I haven't done any work I always was aware of my father's trauma. And I always felt compassion towards him. I understood the limitations. I deeply felt the sadness of it. I didn't have to do work to get there, but I know for some people, they need to do a lot of healing to access that, right? And my sense is that was the same for you, as far as I remember from our conversation. And why do you think that is? Some people are able to have that compassion towards their parents regardless, and some people are just unable. What is that?
That is a very interesting question. Yeah, I don't know why, just from the start, some people are able to have it. What I do know is that in working with people, holding space for them, it does change. It can change. I've had clients who had what I have to say too is, I don't know about you, but for my parents, they were never abusive or intentionally abusive. So I don't know what it's like, to have a parent who abused me, intentionally. So I don't know if I would have compassion. That might be very complicated. My parents definitely did their best and, loved us in the best way that they could. Of course, they were flawed, but I always knew their intentions were good and they were doing what they could. So, but with clients, I've definitely had, these extreme scenarios of the most abusive parents you could imagine. And I can't say the client is like at the end loving their parents and wanting to spend time with them. But at the end, we arrive through this revisiting and through a journeying through the perspective of the parent, right? Your parent from their birth and their growing up, like literally seeing through their eyes, imagining the world as it was, because, generations lived through World War II, Holocaust, like there are things that have deeply impacted the previous generations, and you can't expect them to parent us in the way that we are able to parent today. And so people can change their hatred, their animosity, their like deep resentment into more of a neutrality and a boundary, saying, like my mother energetically, she's over there. I'm not going to call her every day, but I get it. Like I accept her as she is. Doesn't mean I want to have a close relationship to her, right? For some of these clients, they might not want that, but they do. It can change. So I think that's the good news, is that no matter what your perception of your parents is, there is always, always hope and the ability to transform and transmute it. Because in the end, the person that you're harming is yourself. By holding this resentment, this anger, this frustration, it's only harming you and potentially even then passing on to your children or into your work. So it's very, very important to liberate yourself of these judgments towards your parents.
I remember the movie that you recommended. So let's talk about that a little bit, because you already mentioned seeing the parents' perspective, their life. And ever since that movie, I've been thinking about like my mom's life. There was a really powerful movie, Petite Maman, right? Do you want to say what the movie is about? I've seen it like maybe a year ago, but I still feel it impacted me deeply. It raised questions in me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Me too. Yeah, definitely. And you make me want to rewatch it. It's very interesting. It's a little girl and you don't know exactly what's happening, for most of the movie. Just a little girl and there's, another little girl and they become friends and you can kind of figure out there's something happening between her parents, this little girl's parents. And you realize almost, I guess it's like halfway, right, through the movie or towards the end, that this other little girl is the mom. It's of the little girl that is, the main character, and that the little girl has time traveled into her own mother's childhood and they've become friends. And it's just such a beautiful idea to see that, played out in a film, because that's exactly what these journeys are about, right? When we work with parts or when we go back and heal, we're time traveling. But I love the idea of the friendship. It's not just visiting and seeing through their eyes and imagining your parents' childhood. It's like, wow, like what would it have been like to have a relationship with my parents? If I were the same age as my mom and dad and I was friends with them, like it's mind blowing actually, right? When you really put yourself into that whole scenario and seeing the pain and the dreams and seeing your parents as having had to make choices, right? To raise you, maybe giving up on some dreams. Yeah. So.
Yeah, definitely. It was a powerful movie. It begins with, I think, in the current day, right? Where the child, the main character, is with her real mom and they're grandmother is dying or died. They're in the nursing home, taking her belongings and stuff like that. Then they go to the mother's childhood home. And that's where everything begins, right? So she goes because she knew some stories from her mother's life, like that mom played alone in the forest. She made forts and those wooden structures. So she ventures into the forest one day and you see another child who looks like her. It's the same age. But later in the movie, you realize that she meets her mother. She time travels and she becomes friends with her mother and she experiences the loneliness that her mother experienced. She sees her grandmother, how she is ill. And this whole connection, it was just so interesting. That made me really think about, wow, if I were to travel to 1952 or 1950, let's say 7, where my mom was 5 years old, or it's like, what was life like that at that time, post-war, right? Did she have any toys? Of course, I know the home my mom grew up in, my grandmother's home. And, what did they do? What did she do? Did she go to school? Because I don't have a lot of pictures. Even if you do have pictures, they don't tell the story like a movie would. But I find it as a fantastic exercise to do for yourself, to, as much as you can, to travel and connect to your parent or see how they're experiencing their childhood. If you know some stories, even better. But if you don't, I think it's a phenomenal exercise. It just opens your heart in amazing ways.
It absolutely is. Yeah, it's one of the most powerful exercises. You just have to close your eyes. It's nice to have somebody guide you through it. And it doesn't have to be, it could be a therapist, that would be wonderful, but you could even have a friend or a partner, or you could record yourself, because it's beautiful to close your eyes and just take yourself through, literally imagining your mother or your father in the womb of your grandmother and start from there. The surprising thing is that it lives in your body. Like I've had people tell me, oh, but I don't know much. I'm not sure. And then once we get into this meditation, this journey, they know everything. They have such clear impressions. They'll be like, oh, okay, I feel my grandmother is stressed. She's tense. She's not sure about this pregnancy. Like the clarity of the information that we hold in our psyche and also in the collective field, the information is there. We can access it. You really have to trust yourself that you will access it very easily. And then you continue, right? So imagine your mom being born. What was that like for her? Watch your grandmother, your grandfather, see her as a toddler. Like you can really just travel through time and trust. Just notice what impressions, what you feel it would have been like. And it's the most beautiful way to connect with a parent to a world that we weren't part of, but that is held in our body.
Oh my gosh, so true. Like when you were saying that, I'm imagining like my grandmother in 1952, when my mom was born. What was it like after World War II? My grandfather came from war. He was imprisoned in Germany. And that's when my mother was born. What was it like? Was she a fruit of love? Did they have gynecologists, doctors? Like, where was she born? Were there hospitals? I don't even know a lot of it. What was it like for my grandmother, who already had other children, older children, and she already had lost a son at age 13? Like having this last child and a daughter, what did that mean for my grandmother? These are such interesting ideas to explore, and I find it fascinating. I don't know if other people find it fascinating or more re-traumatizing. I'm not sure, but I feel like there is so much potential in this kind of exercises or exploration.
Yes. Yeah. For me, yeah, I think, again, you have to trust yourself, right? So if you don't feel the urge to do this, don't do it, right? That's where we really have to trust our own wisdom and our own knowledge. Like if you're feeling like, no, I don't want to go there, but if it's something that you feel your heart is open to and you're curious about, to me, it's brought a lot of softness. And when I work with people and guide them through it, it's definitely this exercise specifically is the greatest tool in shifting that anger and resentment. Because as you go through this, you're like, oh, I didn't think of that, that when she was two, the brother died or something happened or the parents got divorced, like you really start seeing it from a completely different angle. You take yourself out because you didn't even exist, right? Until you can continue this exercise until the moment you were born. And you can even go further, of course, but you weren't there. And so I feel like our ego a little bit quiets and is able to be more in the place of the observer and the witness, that's how we step out of that triangle: victim, bully, rescuer. And so it opens things up. It creates spaciousness and it creates room for healing.
Yeah, creates room for healing. I think that's exactly the word. Very interesting. How about when our own children, one day might do this exercise? Oh boy.
Yes.
I don't know. What would they discover?
That's a very interesting question, right? I was just because what we perceive is so different than I was thinking of my parents, and I have so many preconceived ideas about their relationship and were they happy or not. And really, it's none of my business at all. And then when I watch childhood tapes, we recently found garage, like 25 tapes that I hadn't seen in so long that my dad recorded. And it was this gift, almost that he left for us, where you see these moments that I would have never seen in my entire life, right? That I didn't remember. And I see my parents laughing and I see how my mom is looking at my dad. And I realize I know nothing about their relationship, And so our children, it will be the same. They're going to have their ideas about who we were and we remember so little, right? Like so much information happens in a year of childhood, and you usually remember the difficult moments, right? When mom yelled at me or mom said no, or, like you're a horrible mother, but all those little beautiful moments. So yeah, they'll have their own perspective and their own traveling through. And we just know that we did our best. I think that's all we can hope for.
Yeah, I think that perspective gives the parent who is a parent today a little relief not to be hard on themselves, because no matter what, your children are going to have their own version of the story. No matter how well you treated them or how much you sacrificed, they may, based on one memory or experience, they may construct a whole narrative around their childhood, around something significant, emotional, traumatic, potentially, right? It sort of colors your entire view, and that is not our responsibility. They can heal from that too. We don't want to change that or put burden or pressure on ourselves today, whether we are doing it right or doubting. I hear so often from parents. I had one parent recently who has two children, older boy and a younger boy. The younger boy is 3. She says, "Oh, with my older boy, I was so caring. My child never got sick until the age 3. He was I protected him as if like you can protect from illness and, bacteria and things like that, viruses." But she told the story to herself that she was a great mother because her child didn't get sick until the age 2.5. Well, with her second one, he got sick. Well, this is post-COVID, viruses, like so much is happening. And she's feeling awful. She's berating herself. She feels like a failure that she didn't protect her son. Like I was listening and feeling so sad for this mom, And the moment we shift our focus and put the weight of how we parent, on things that we can control, like the sickness, you can't control that. If you're placing your value as a parent or your worth or the weight of how you are as a parent on something that is outside of your control, you're going to be in deep trouble all the time. I asked her, I said, what are things you do that you're proud of, that comes from you, that you provide, that are concrete, that you can control? Can you place your worth, your weight of your parenting on that, like on that ground? And she was like really thinking, she didn't know what that is. She has to explore that in order to feel connected to that she's a great mother, even if her child gets sick, right? It's not like you didn't protect him. You're still protecting him, but you don't have control over certain things. And don't place or hinge your happiness or your worth and value as a parent on things that are on a shaky ground outside of your control. Or, I feel like we need to help parents to find that, we have to find that for ourselves. in order not to feel like, oh, we failed our children, we damaged them. They're going to need therapy, but can you be kind towards yourself? And that's a self-compassionate act, like shifting what are the things that are in my control that I'm doing that are great. And I gave her an exercise. I said, for the next 1 week, every day, have a journal, and every night before you go to bed, reflect on the day and write down 5 to 10 things that you did for your children that day that makes you a great mom, makes you a great parent in your own eyes. And she started thinking, she's like, well, but there's nothing, like, I fed them, I did this. I'm like, why are you discounting? These are important things, I want parents to tap into that energy of their own greatness. We're so quick to dismiss the things that we do well or we provide for our children. We always focus on the, oh my gosh, the negative. I damaged them. I failed them. I didn't give them this. I didn't do that. And that creates doubt in us. I think we have to consciously shift our attention and practice more self-compassion and focus on the things that we are doing well or in an okay way. Not even maybe, it's not about perfection, right? There are things that you're doing for your children that are amazing. Every parent does. And so, yeah, I feel like that's a conversation we need to have and help parents with that and not to worry about the future, what we didn't give them, or because you can always find that. You can always find flow. But can you find the goodness? Can you train yourself to spot the goodness, in yourself, in your everyday interactions with your children? There are many, many small little moments,
And then it's an example for them, because I definitely see, I'm hard, as most of us, right? We're hard on ourselves. We have, exactly like your client, these high expectations, as if we could prevent the world from impacting our children, right? Every parent just wants to keep their child safe. We don't want things to happen to them. And so there is this mama bear, like, I'm going to be a superwoman. But then the child sees that. And so that's what we're modeling, is this perfectionism, this harshness towards ourselves, anxiety, stress, control. And then we're wondering, oh, why is my child so hard on themselves, right? Beating themselves up. Like, I suck, mom. I can't do it right. I'm not pretty enough. I'm this, I'm that. Well, it starts with us, right? And the key, exactly what you were saying, self-compassion. I think that's really the answer to everything. Self-kindness, self-compassion. And it's definitely a work in progress. It's a work of every day, softening, listening, admitting, speaking out loud, like, wow, I did this. I'm happy I was able to do this, or this is challenging for me. I'm feeling this. I need this, just vocalizing what's going on internally in front of our children, like showing that vulnerability, showing that we are human and we are not these superheroes that can prevent them from being sick, even though we would like that, but it's not real. And so then we're therefore failing, right? If we hold that.
Yeah. And if we're going to practice berating ourselves, criticizing, if we're going to spend the time, energy, and the mind space for that, can we just switch the flow and focus on self-kindness and self-compassion? If we're going to spend time and energy, let's nurture and cultivate something that is going to be helpful for us in a long run, right? And why are so many children so anxious? Because parents aim for perfect parenting, perfect lunches, perfect this, perfect that. And so there's no room for children to see that, wow, mistakes, failure is a possibility and it's a thing and it's okay. By being constantly on top of things, trying to get things right and perfect and happening for our children and being this superhuman makes for an anxious child. They become scared of failure, scared of trying new things. And a lot of parents complain these days. They're like, my child doesn't want to do this. They don't want to engage. They're scared. They're scared of failure or success. Or it's like, wow, because the way we parent is impacting them. Like there is no room for error. Like that's we're raising the bar for them unintentionally. And children are so stressed and anxious because of that, because now they feel like, wow, there's no room for error. Like if this woman can do everything and my mom is a superhero, life is not like that. Like as a growing child, you're going to make mistakes. But the way you internalized what mistakes mean is going to hinder you, I feel like the more we can let go of those perfectionistic ideals and high expectations, the easier will be for us and for our children. you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And then as you were speaking, what came to me, I was like, what is the source of this perfectionism? I think a lot of it goes back to inner child, and we're craving to be recognized and finally receive that love and approval, right? From our mom and dad. So if we can go and support the inner child so that this desperate like perfectionism to finally be seen can soften, I think that is what's going to help us the most. To have some humor, right? To be like, you know what? Yeah, of course I'm human, because my inner child is not running the show. You know, when we're not aware of the inner child and of the pain, very often they become this little dictator inner child, right? They're running our life, but we're not conscious of it. And so by doing, you don't have to spend years on this at all, just bringing some awareness to those pain points and supporting those parts, it really will impact and soften your need to control, and just see yourself more as an imperfect adult, just like you see your parents as perfectly imperfect. You know, when we're still holding our parents to this God standard of, my mother should have been this perfect mother, I should have had the perfect childhood, we're trying to repair that by being a perfect mom, right? We're trying to up level our parents, and that doesn't work. Like, our parents, they came before us. We respect them. We are smaller in a way, right? We're the next generation. So we honor, we respect them. We don't try to like, look how much better I am, you know, mom. So yeah, I think that's a big part of it. And we can get ourselves reoriented out of this. And I agree with you. It's a generational thing. Like, I know I've been doing this, every single one of my friends and has been on this very similar path of trying to do it perfectly from the minute I got pregnant. It's like, what's the perfect prenatal vitamin, the perfect midwife, the home birth, the blah, 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 blah. Like this crazy idea that I could fix life if I just did everything perfectly, my child would never have problems. It's not realistic and not helpful.
Yeah, and in fact, that's the biggest. It's a cause for anxiety for our children, and it's so damaging for ourselves because we would never measure up to our own standards, and we would never feel good enough. It comes from the need to feel good enough, worthy, because it comes from that lack. And when we build things on that lack that are not realistic, they shatter, and we're left with even bigger hole of, I'm not good enough. Look, see, you know. So it's best to embrace the messy. It's best to develop self-compassion. It's best to not judge ourselves for, you know, making quote unquote mistakes. It's important to lower our expectations, not lower completely, like you have no expectations. That's not what I'm talking about, but not so high that it's unattainable and you have to work so hard to achieve that. You know, it's about letting go, embracing certain things. You know, it's back to our initial point when we started the conversation of, where do you find that balance of planning things but also being flexible? I feel like, you know, you can't be like rigidly obsessing over your expectations and perfectionism and I'm going to give my children what I didn't receive from my parents. I think I even have that on my website. Do you want to parent differently than your parents? And it's like we subscribe to those ideals, but we create bigger holes for ourselves by approaching it religiously, by doing it hard. It's good to have the idea loosely and leave room for error and for humanity instead of saying, I'm going to do everything, you know, in opposition of my parents. And it's like, no, like that's too hard. You're creating a new set of problems now for yourself and for your kids. I feel like it's good to have the ideal there. Yes, we do want to parent differently than our parents, but can we be easy and kind while we're doing it?
And have humility too. You know, we don't know like what our children's generation will be like in 20, 30 years. We're raising kids in an age of social media and technology, which we don't know what is the right way to deal with this, to parent it. And so having a little bit more humility and, like you said, loosening that grip of knowing exactly like what to do. I don't think we do know. We're really doing our best. And when we fanatically take what our parents did and try to do exactly the opposite, in a way, we're living our life still tethered to them too much. You know, there's not enough freedom there, and there's not enough of a healthy distance, because then we're just doing everything in opposition and comparing ourselves to them. And so we're not being ourselves, really.
Yeah, and it goes down back to the values, right? Like I had one woman whose mother was not present and neglectful and blah, blah, blah. And she's like, I'm going to have kids and I'm going to have 4 kids in spite of my mom, right? Because she couldn't hold a family of 2. I'm going to prove it to obviously this is unconscious. And now she's struggling, right? It's like, wow, I love this stuff. This is fascinating. Exploring it, talking about this. But what are some final thoughts that you have, or you want to conclude this conversation with? Maybe a question for the listener, maybe a quote, maybe just a summary of what we said. What is alive in you right now based on this conversation?
Yeah, what feels alive is this idea of shifting, the power of shifting perspective. Like when we can see a situation, an event from another perspective. It might be of course, we don't know exactly the person's perspective, but our imagination or sensation of it. And then we step back into ourselves. I think that's magic. Like magic is a shift in perspective. And so there's so much fancy, complicated, amazing, beautiful modalities and books. There's so much out there. And often it feels, at least for me, it's like I'll never know it all. I'll never have enough time to read all the parenting books. But if we can just sit and be in our hearts and know that it's enough to try to understand our own parents, our own grandparents, the world they lived in, and to try to understand ourselves and our children, just using that amazing, simple tool of, let me take my ego out of it, like my own agenda for a moment, and let me just like sit with what I imagine it would be like. Or just if I float above this situation, what do I notice that's different? Like kind of that bird's eye view. Like Thich Nhat Hanh says, understanding is love. Like if you can't understand, you can't love. And when you understand yourself and your suffering, you love yourself. So that's what I'd love to leave us with today is let's focus on that, because in the end, it's not this intellectual journey of perfection. It is about love and it is about understanding ourselves and each other.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your wisdom, for your presence. I enjoyed every moment of it. I loved seeing you and connecting with you. And I cannot wait to see you in the summer when you come from France. Maybe we should in person record another podcast. I always love to get podcasts out of friends and people who I admire. Thank you so much, Nina.
It's such an honor. Thank you for what you offer. Like your podcast is an anchor. Every time I'm having a tough parenting moment, which can be often, I fall asleep listening to it. So,
oh God. Okay. Thank you. That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Isn't Nina just wonderful? What are some of your takeaways from this episode? I would love to hear. As always, you can send me a note to the email info@authenticparenting.com. You can leave a voicemail by calling the number 732-763-2576. And for international listeners, there is a free tool on the contact page of my website. Go to authenticparenting.com/contact and send me a message. If you love the podcast, show your support by writing a review on Apple Podcasts or rating it on Spotify. Make a one-time or a monthly donation at authenticparenting.com/support, or simply share the podcast on your social media or send the link to your friends. If you want to connect with your fellow listeners from around the world, engage in meaningful conversations about the show, get support and answers to your parenting questions, join the Authentic Parenting community on Facebook, a private support group for parents like you. And as always, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. Until next week, I am Anna Seewald. Thank you so much for listening.